Irashaimase. Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Eigengrau, a unique twin-stick shoot 'em up. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Martin Mauersix, Eigengrau originally released for the PC in summer of 2023. Now in November of 2023, it's available for the Nintendo Switch, and that's the version we're looking at today. Right off the bat, this is a title I can say I heartily recommend, especially if you're a fan of twin sticks. So the core mechanic of the game is that you've got all these stages which have different unique gimmicks or mechanics throughout the course of them, and with as many stages as you have, you get to see a lot of really innovative, unique ideas thrown into a twin-stick shoot-'em-up. And that just comes across as something that's really fresh and fun. Add on top of that, it's a great value for the amount that you pay. This is definitely a solid win in the chef's book. Alright, with that said, if you're interested in checking this one out, there is a demo on Steam. But let's dive into the gameplay itself, and you can see a little bit of what I'm talking about. Here we find ourselves at the main menu. So before we dive into the game itself, just wanted to talk a little bit about what's under some of these other options. So settings includes a lot of great accessibility options that I really love to see in the game. So there are some issues with screen shake and some rotating backgrounds that you can disable in the settings. I really appreciate it when those kind of options are included. Under extras, you have some trophy challenges you can aim to complete yourself, or if you're playing this on the PC version on Steam, then you can get those trophies within the system itself. There's also a fun password system where you can use various passwords to unlock like new weapons or other elements in the game itself. Now under play, there's a couple different ways we can play the game. So there's the classic mode, and think of this as just starting through the beginning and playing through all the stages, or we can go and play the individual stages themselves. The stages are broken up into these different phases, and you can pick each of the phases that you want to go and play individually, and that comes into play with the way that all the mechanics are different throughout the phases. But for our purposes, we'll start off with classic and then we'll go from there. The game does support two-player co-op simultaneous, which is what we'll be playing with. You can adjust the game speed, here's the difficulty, and then there's a shield. This is basically a player assist. The developer recommends, if you're looking for a moderate challenge, 20 is a good point, but there is an item you can get that will give you 1,000, which is what we're going to show off just to make our gameplay a little bit easier on our end. So by default, weapon-wise, you start with the laser, but there are two other weapons that you can currently unlock, the pulse and the wave. Those can be unlocked through gameplay or through passwords. And the password for the pulse is MAUVE, M-A-U-V-E. The password for the wave is Jade, J-A-D-E. I'll include a link to an FAQ from the developer below that does include some additional passwords if you're interested in checking that out yourself. Starting the game once we're ready, we can see the basic mechanics for Eigengrau here. So it's a pretty standard twin stick with movement controlled by the left stick and fire controlled by the right stick. One thing that is a little more unique to note is that you're only allowed to fire in the cardinal directions, so up, down, left, and right. And that does come into play with some of the mechanics that the individual phases throughout the game will have. So these introductory stages are relatively straightforward, largely teaching you how to play the game. So moving around the ship, targeting and firing at the enemies, but then things start to get more unique in this segment here as an example. So these enemies start off shielded, but once we destroy like the set of black enemies, those enemies are no longer shielded, and you will start to see mechanics kind of like that used in all of the individual stages and the phases within those stages. In addition to that, we have several different methods of being scored. So we're building combo for every single time that we're shooting at enemies as well as multipliers. In addition to that, we also are timed for the stages, so you can possibly get, if you were to be exemplary at a stage, you could potentially get an X, but there's also an S for A, B, and then ultimately C, and you get points based off of your time completion. So here's where things start to get a little bit different with the way the game is. This area kind of teaches you that you have to stop firing to be able to move a little bit faster. And then we have a little section here where we're like taught to kind of use like focus to be able to squeeze between small areas. Your hitbox is very, very small, so that's something to keep in mind. Every segment does have some bonus objectives to complete. We've made it to our first boss here, and those bonus objectives initially can be a little bit hidden, but the game does help you find those ultimately if you're loading individual sections from the stage itself. So the boss fights are one of my favorite elements of the game. Each boss is broken up into several different segments, each defined by a different color. So in addition to the attack segment being defined by a certain color, usually the enemy shot, there'll also be a drone or a fragment that shows up throughout the course of the gameplay as well, that if we can destroy or collect all of 8 of those, and there are 8 phases in the fight, then we'll unlock a fragment from the boss that will ultimately lead us to a true final boss. I haven't been able to complete that challenge just yet, but that's something to aim for. There is a password you can unlock that will just give you that, but what would be the fun in taking the challenge out of it? So this fight itself is a great example of how the game uses just really unique mechanics to kind of change things up. So it definitely is a twin stick that leans very much into the bullet hell element of the spectrum, and we're seeing that here with this particular sword fight, where we're having to go and both physically dodge the sword itself as well as the great bullet patterns that this boss is sending out. So the boss's life bar is displayed in the top. It does have a nice percentage meter, so you can easily tell where you're at, as well as the grade or the time grade that we have. And ultimately, there's another multiplier that has to do with both the hits we've taken and the damage that we've dealt to the boss itself. Boss done, and some awesome explosions from that point on. So once again, in arcade mode, you're playing through all the stages, or in arcade classic rather, you're playing through all the stages in consecutive order. So if we were to go and load up an individual stage, then we would be breaking things down to the phases one at a time, which can be pretty advantageous if you wanted to go and replay a stage. So now we're starting to get introduced to some other really interesting mechanics. These enemies have shields that will deflect our bullets, but the shields don't cover all sides. So if we sneak around them, then we can get around and destroy the enemies from, well, the back or the sides, depending on what sides are not covered in the shields. Of interesting to note, so color plays a really big part of this game. As we defeat enemies, the color drains out of them to gray before they ultimately blow up, and this also holds true for bosses. So in addition to the life bar at the top, you can kind of tell how much damage you've done on the boss based off of how much color remains in the boss. So this section here is pretty neat. We've got all these different enemies with shields, but we can fire our way through the red sections, ultimately getting to all the enemies and clearing the wave. Now we're introduced to another mechanic. So these laser lines don't actually hurt us, but they do go and pin us to certain sections of the stage. So the mechanic here is that we need to destroy these spinning ninja stars on the laser lines to ultimately clear and complete them. And also, one thing we can go and see is if sections where we don't finish the wave fast enough, the enemies will just loop around. So here we can see that the waves will kind of just push us to the bottom of this, or rather the laser lines will push us to the bottom of the screen, and then those enemies will ultimately warp back to the top of the screen or left and right, depending on where they exited, basically looping around. once we complete this phase, I'm going to go ahead and send us back to the main menu just to show off a couple of the other sections that I really like in the game itself. Well, for one thing, the title screen displays the background of the stage you were last in. I think that's quite the nice touch. So all these stages have these little icons that indicate the what kind of mechanic they have to them. If you haven't played the stages, some of these might not make any sense, but I'm going to jump to area 4. This stage has the ones that I enjoy the most. I've had a lot of fun with this stage, so we'll dive in here and I'll kind of give you my final thoughts on the game itself. So as far as minus flavors are concerned, I really don't have many. I've really enjoyed this game. There are a couple sections that I feel can get frustrating, but where it's just a minor element to the gameplay itself, I don't think they're too worth bringing up, as it's just individual stages, individual mechanics that aren't necessarily my favorite. But ones like this, where we're being forced to fire in the direction the arrows are facing, is actually one that I think is really neat. But as far as some minus flavors are concerned, so there are some sections where we'll have enemies that look like items that we, sometimes they're items that we need to collect that often will also look like enemies. So I kind of wish that there was a little bit of a clear delineation between what was an enemy and what was a pickup overall. Then there's also just the fact that, as awesome as I think this game is, I feel like the visual presentation is a little bit of a letdown, especially to somebody that was just looking at it without playing the game itself. They might be like, this doesn't really look all that great, and so they wouldn't be invested in it. So I kind of wish it was just a little bit, there was a bit more enemy variety, and the game itself wasn't quite as plain in graphics. So if you're loading up the game with just individual stages, once you complete the stage, you'll have the option to either play it again, exit back to the menu, or you can just continue next. So it does go and break things up. It's not quite as smooth as if you were playing it in the classic mode, but you can still progress through the entire game in this manner. But as far as the plus flavors are concerned, so I definitely feel that for the what you're paying here, you're getting some great value with how much gameplay is ultimately being presented here. There's a lot of stages, a ton of unique ideas throughout all those stages. And then there's all the additional challenges that you can challenge yourself with as well. Both collecting all the bonus stars in every single section, as well as completing the game in higher difficulties, challenging yourself with the scores. All of this definitely leads to just some great value. But more than that, the part that I really love about this game is just that unique, fun, fresh feel that it has with all these different gimmicks and innovative ideas thrown into shoot 'em ups. And there are also some fun homage thrown in there as well that I won't spoil, as I was just grinning ear to ear when I went and played some of those stages. So I want you to be able to experience that in a more organic way. Basically, all this leads me to once again say that this is a title that I heartily recommend you try, even if it's just the PC demo that's available. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you yourself have a wonderful week, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.